So throughout this class, we've talked a lot about visualization. So far, we've basically talked about visualizations, where you're mapping from your data to some visual element on a piece of paper or a digital screen. So I just wanted to wrap up by talking about some weird visualizations, which are not actually mapping visual attributes to data, but mapping other things. So this is a figure from The Grammar of Graphics, which is that famous textbook by Leland Wilkinson, where he talks about the theory of how you should be able to build up graphics. And he's showing the relationship between intensity and sensation for these different stimuli. And so this is where you might say like, oh, length is an easier, a better, and more accurate way to map data than area or volume. It's hard for people to tell the difference between different volumes, but it's pretty accurate to see the difference between different lengths. But what I think is interesting here is that he's included a bunch of other stimuli. So he's got, brightness, loudness, smell, taste, duration, things like that. And there are a lot of folks who have kind of pushed the boundaries of data visualization by pulling in some of these other types of stimuli. So I think the one that I see the most commonly is using sound as something to display data. So this actually has a word. It's called sonification. And I know a couple examples, so I'm just going to show them to you. So the first one is this piece from npr.org, which is a decade of US home prices sung as opera. So here's that example, the US home prices sung as opera. This is from 2011, so it's a kind of an older piece, but it's going through this home price index, and from the sort of housing bubble before the recession that was in 2008, 2009. And so they wanted a way to display this data that wasn't just visual, and so they converted this data into musical notes, and then they were able to give this to someone who can read sheet music, unlike myself, and had this opera singer sing the data. So if you click on this listen button, it will play you the decade of US home prices as a sonification. I think you can kind of hear that one, and then we can compare Miami and then Dallas. So let's listen to those as well. And finally, let's do Dallas. So I think you can really hear the difference between those things. And I mean, I think this is like somewhat of a novelty to be able to listen to data visualization rather than to see it, but you could imagine if you were someone who was blind or visually impaired that maybe this would be the way or a way for you to experience data visualization. The other visualization that I think of when I think of sonification is this one race, every medalist ever visualization, which we might have talked about in class already. This is another kind of old one, but I think it's really nicely done. So here we are on the New York Times site, and this is a 2-minute long video, but it's about Usain Bolt and how far ahead of every Olympic medalist he is.
Just how fast was Usain Bolt's gold medal sprint? Let's put him on a slightly bigger stage and see him race against every Olympic medalist since 1896.
So they set Usain Bolt up against all these other runners, and there's lots of good visualization of all of these pieces. Let's see if I can find where they actually do the sonification. I think it's near the end. I think it's here.
The difference between today's athletes and the fastest humans of the 19th century? Just about 3 seconds.
So it's kind of a small element of that piece, but I think that it is really effectively done. So if you look at the graph, even if you're seeing it like this, it really looks like there's a big difference between Usain Bolt and then these, historic athletes. But when we hear it at the end, we're able to see what the difference really is. You could also think about how you could use your sense of touch to be able to experience data. So this is the idea of data physicalization. And again, I think this is a little bit of a novelty, but you could also think if you were blind or visually impaired, how this would be useful. And maybe history says that the first visualizations were even these sort of physicalizations. There's a great website, dataphys.org, which is a bunch of ways that data can be physicalized. I really like this example, which is from 1935, where the Detroit Edison Company visualized the way that the system load moved over time. So this is kind of like a 3D data visualization. This is a piece that I like, which is a little bit more modern, showing how you could sort of dynamically physicalize data. So I think the Tangible Media Group at MIT has other things in mind for this materialable, which is an interface which has these blocks that can be controlled by the computer. But I think that there's some interesting potential for doing data visualizations, like you can see here. This one is maybe not quite data physicalization, but I think that it almost fits in that scenario. So this is a project from the Wall Street Journal about the NASDAQ. It's a 3D visualization that you can experience in virtual reality. I can't show you the virtual reality version, but if you have VR viewer for your mobile device, you can put your phone like in a Google Cardboard, something like that. If you just have a phone, you could move around in it, and if you're on the desktop, you can kind of click and drag to look around. I don't think it's quite as useful. But you're gonna basically ride the NASDAQ as if you're on a roller coaster. And we can start the ride. So it will take us from this visualization to essentially a data physicalization where we can ride as we're moving up through time and up this tall roller coaster. And again, this obviously is not physical. Oh my goodness. But it almost feels physical, even in the browser. And I think the experience in virtual reality is even more so. And then you can see as you sort of move back down the valley. There's also a nice YouTube video here where one of the creators of the visualization is talking about it at OpenVisConf. I'll link that in my extras playlist. So now we're getting even weirder. We're getting into representing data using tastes. So maybe we could call this tastification. So there's examples like this is also from data physicalization. It's gummy candies that are population pyramids of the EU countries. I love this project. It's called Data Cuisine. It's from Susanna Yashko and Moritz Stefaner. They hold these workshops where they get people together and have the folks in the workshop create data tastifications, if you will. So some of these I think are maybe meant to be looked at. They're more for visual consumption, like this pizza, which is showing the percentage of energy in Switzerland that comes from renewable sources. This doesn't look too delicious to eat, but it gives you the visual idea. I also probably wouldn't want to taste this tastification of the number of fecal coliform bacteria in the Boston Harbor. That seems pretty gross. This one is a little more appealing. Here are some cocktails that are showing which pieces of the population have access to liquid assets. This was actually done by my friends Boone and Caro Sheridan from Massachusetts, and they're cocktail enthusiasts. So they decided to create their tastification using cocktails. Another example is from Nathan Yao. We've read some selections from his books, and I know you know his blog Flowing Data. Nathan decided to brew some multivariate beer. So he put different ingredients in the beer like hops and yeast and whatever else goes in beer that were in proportion to different pieces of data from the US Census. And I think Nathan said that the beer didn't taste great, so it was more of an experiment, but that's another example of tastification. Going even further, we could imagine trying to use our sense of smell as a way to experience data. Maybe this is smellification. I know a couple examples here. So Tiga Brain did a workshop at the I/O Festival in Minneapolis a couple years ago. I think my dad actually went to it. It was called Eat the Data, Smell the Data. So they were smellifying data. The other example that I can think here is Sissel Tolas. She also did a talk at the I/O Festival about how she uses smell and generates molecules that have a very particular scent. I'm not sure that she's doing as much data smellification, but she's certainly working with smell and giving people an experience based on smell. I think that was pretty interesting. If we go back and look at this graphic from Leland Wilkinson, we've got things like smell and loudness and brightness, volume, area, length, duration, taste, heaviness. I went looking to see if there was a way to use heaviness to encode data, and I found this idea of virtual gravity showing the physical weight of data. But I think that one is pretty far out there. And then when I look at this visualization from the Grammar of Graphics, the last thing that comes out to me in this sensation versus intensity plot is shock. And I don't know of anyone who is encoding data by giving physical shocks to people, but maybe that's the next stage of weird visualization. So this is how I wanted to leave our class. We've talked about some interesting visualizations, like doing handmade visualizations, like the Dear Data experience, but people are really pushing the envelope and going even beyond the sorts of things that you could do on a physical page or a digital page, and they're engaging all of the senses with things like sonification, physicalization, tastification, and smellification.